What is the first thing you think on when you see the word Nintendo? Would it be this or this? Let's dive into this. This is Lonely Mimikyu, and today we will be covering the history of Nintendo. So if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new videos. And if you enjoyed this one, please tap the like button. Don't forget to check out my other videos where we also cover history and tracks of Pokemon. And please leave a comment if you like it or if you would like other materials and other videos, because this really helps the channel to grow and make the community even bigger. Without further delay, let's jump right on it. Nintendo is now an innovative tycoon and is one of the biggest game development companies in the world. They have branches located in 3 different continents. They have 4 in Japan, that being their main headquarters, and their research and development. 2 in America, their Nintendo of America headquarters and technology and development. 1 in France for their European research and development, or Nintendo of Europe, and that doesn't even scratch the surface on what they are now. Nintendo also partially owns Nintendo EAD. The company is responsible for Mario and The Legend of Zelda. They also partially own the Pokemon Group, which consists of Game Freak, Umbrella, Genius Sonority, the Pokemon Company, and Creatures, who created Pokemon series. Intelligent System, who came up with the Fire Emblem series, and not to mention Hall Laboratory, responsible for this guy. And a lot more to mention. Now that you think of when you look at this, there is more than meets the eye, but all of this would never have been possible if it wasn't for this man, Mr. Fusachiro Yamauchi. Nintendo was founded as Yamauchi Nintendo on September 23rd, 1889, based out of Kyoto, Japan. They first produced these cards, called Hamafuda. Yes, game cards. Who would have known? And what was cool about these cards were that they were all handmade, and they soon gained so much popularity, he had to hire an assistant to help mass produce the cards, due to the high demand. You are awesome, Mr. Fusachiro Yamauchi. Mr. Fusachiro did not have a son to inherit the business, so he actually adopted his son-in-law, Sekiryo Kaneda. So in 1929, Mr. Fusachiro retired and Serikyo Kaneda took over as president of the company. And in 1933, Sekiryo established a joint venture and renamed the company Yamauchi Nintendo & Co. Later on, he established a distribution company, Marufuku Co. Limited, to distribute the Hamafuda, as well as several types of cards. Sekiryo had only a daughter, so again, he adopted his son-in-law. But later on, his son-in-law abandoned the family and did not become the company president. So actually his son, Hiroshi Yamauchi, took over the company instead of his father. In 1949, Hiroshi, now the president of Nintendo, renamed Marufuku Co. Limited to Nintendo Kurata, and in 1953, Nintendo became the only company in Japan to manufacture playing cards from plastic. Okay guys, this is where it gets interesting. Hiroshi went to the US to engage in talks with the United States Playing Card Company, which were the dominant playing card manufacturer in the US, only to find out that the world's biggest company in his business is related to a small office, which made him think about the limitations of his business. This was a turning point of his business. In 1959, Nintendo struck a deal with Disney. Who knew that Disney would strike a deal with a company card, right? They made cards and books for Disney teaching other ways to play card games. And to our surprise, it worked. They had a huge success with this and sold over 600,000 packs of cards in a single year. That's a lot of cards. And because of this, they took Nintendo public, listing the company in Osaka Stock Exchange, second division. Wow! Imagine buying stocks from them before and selling them now. So now we know they started with cards, but how does cards become game consoles? Guys, we are not kidding you when we say they have 7 more years to go before hitting that sweet spot for gamers. What's funny is since they have more capital, They tried a variety of businesses, from taxi companies to a love hotel. Yes, a love hotel chain. And food company selling instant rice and a variety of products. They even sold vacuum cleaners. Maybe that's why Luigi has a vacuum cleaner. What do you guys think? Is that maybe a coincidence? Naturally, all these ventures failed, but they did excel in one: toy making. But because of the Japanese economic boom, the market became saturated at this point, and what they were known for, cards, were not being bought anymore. So as a result, their stocks fell. Toy making was hard for them as well, because back in that time, established toy makers were dominating the market. Companies like Bandai and Tommy. Nintendo had a hard time keeping up, and they had to come up with new products frequently. Here comes the golden moment, guys. Hang on tight. In 1996, Mr. Hiroshi noticed an extending arm in one of his factories, which was made by one of his maintenance engineers, named Gunpei Yokoi, for his amusement. Yes, you heard it right. His amusement. They made robot arms for amusement, and so they developed one together as a proper product, just in time for the Christmas rush on that same year. This, my friends, is the earliest blockbuster of Nintendo, the Ultra Hand. Same promise with Yokoi, he took him out of maintenance and put him in product development. Because Yokoi was an electric engineer, he was adept to creating electronic toys. So he invented a lot that were notable, like the Nintendo Beam Gun, which was the precursor to Duck Hunt. So it's the time you all have been waiting for, guys. They did it. They invented the first solar-powered light gun, the Nintendo Beam Gun. It was the first commercially available light gun for home use, and this was a partnership with a company called Sharp. Alright guys, this is where the list really begins. In 1972, the first commercially available video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey, was released. It had the light gun and shooting gallery. Imagine being that kid who had that in 1972. And on 1973, they focused on family entertainment venues, with the laser clay shooting system. After seeing the huge success, they secured rights to the Magnavox Odyssey in 1974. Now, we share the humble beginning of Nintendo. Now we will discuss more about the products we've known and loved. Let's get onto it. After a reasonable success with this, Nintendo began developing its own video games, both for home and arcades in the 1970s. And Mitsubishi Electronic proposed a joint venture with Nintendo for the Color TV game machine. And on 1977, the Color TV game 6 inches and Color TV 15 inches were released. They also came up with their first video arcade game, EVR Race. And a handful of games as well, like Raider Scope and Donkey Kong and Mario Brothers. And in 1992, Nintendo announced they would no longer manufacture arcade equipment. Aside from arcade games, they also shifted to testing consumer handheld video games, where they came up with the Nintendo Game & Watch. And Game & Watch had a single game to be played on an LCD screen. And here's the deal breaker, guys. It had a clock and an alarm to tell you that the game has completely taken over your life. With that being said, they sold over 43 million units. Now we've seen the Game & Watch. How about the next product? Yep, I know you've heard this. The Famicom, or better known as the Family Computer, was released in 1983. This was the first cartridge video game console. For the ones of you that are kids of the 80s and 90s, do you still remember doing this? Yeah. When we were young, when games didn't work, we used to breathe life into them. That's why we are so lifeless now. And they did sell a buttload of units. But because of the 1983-1985 recession, video games hit a 94% decrease in sales, primarily in the North American area. This became known as the video game crash of 1983. Due to the flooding market of video game consoles, the video game crash of 1983 not only took down Atari, for example, but most of the American market itself. Over time, the market shifted off from America to Japan. Nintendo started importing to America, and the only major competition they had was Sega, which was another Japanese company. Let me know, guys, if you want me to make a history about Sega, I can do that as well. Now, despite the crash, Nintendo still stayed afloat and rebranded the Famicom into what we all knew as the NES. Yes, the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was released in 1985 with the ROB. Just for our viewers who don't know what ROB is a toy, or better a robot accessory that was launched at the same time as the NES. At this time, it was branded as the world-only interactive robot, which was a feat in itself. Though it didn't have a long lifespan, it's still thought of as a huge success, and because of this you could see him in the Super Smash Bros. Series, for example. Anyway, enough of that. The quality of Nintendo was established because they decided to add a seal of quality. And they decided to limit games by third-party developers to ensure quality. You may wonder now, guys, so this was their trick. Since time was of the essence, other developers would want to create as much games as they can. But Nintendo was like, no guys, you can only make 5 games per year. But despite the rule Nintendo made, Konami, the first third-party company that was allowed to make game cartridges, made a spin-off company called Ultra Games, in order to make more games per year. Then other third-party companies picked up on this, and all did the same. Well, that's business, guys. In 1989, because of the huge success of the Game & Watch, they released the Game Boy, along with the game Tetris. If you think about it, it was a revolution to actually be able to play different cartridges on a handheld device. Especially if you think about its competitor like the Microvision. Since Nintendo prides itself with quality, they gave the Game Boy a good price and really durable, which sent shockwaves around the world, selling an astonishing 118 million units. A lot of happy boys and girls with their Game Boy. And at the same year they announced there would be a sequel to their Famicom, that would be Super Famicom. I don't know how this works when you slap on a Super on a product that already exists and sells it better. Super history of Nintendo. Leave a comment below if you think that I should do that. Anyways, in November the 21st, 1990, Nintendo released the Super Famicom in Japan and sold out in 3 days. 3 days. Okay guys, I think I'm definitely slapping on the Super on my videos from now on. And in August 1991, Super Famicom was released in the US under the name of SNES, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. So the SNES followed its predecessor with high technical specification of that era, and it also had a new controller, which was far more refined than the first. It had rounded edges and 4 new buttons. 4. This has become, of course, the standard, which is evident with all the modern controllers now. We wouldn't want to leave out this release simply because of its futuristic idea. The Virtual Boy, which released in 1995 but sold poorly in Japan, but still had high hopes for it, so they released it in the US as well. That was another disaster. But that actually makes me think if the Virtual Boy actually didn't pave the way for the present virtual reality. What do you think? Leave a comment down below and let's start a discussion on that. I think it could be really interesting. Anyways, back to the video game. Since at this time competition for Nintendo was growing fierce since its competitor Sega released a 32-bit Saturn and the newcomer Sony introduced a 32-bit PlayStation, not to mention their marketing campaigns, it started to cut into Nintendo's market share. On June 23rd, 1996, the N64 was released. It sold over 500,000 units in Japan and sold 350,000 of its initial shipment. Customers didn't feel the onslaught of advertisements of Sony at this time. But as time passed, customers felt frustrations about the lack of software. This is where Nintendo had more problems. So a lot of manufacturers actually decided then to move and started producing CDs instead of the complicated software for the Nintendo devices. At this point, it would be safe to say that Nintendo was teetering, but they still pushed on and released the Game Boy Pocket, which was a smaller version of the Game Boy, and was the parting gift of its creator Gunpei Yokoi to Nintendo. After the release, Yokoi resigned from Nintendo, and using his skills created WonderSwan, a competitor system. In 1996, Pokémon was released and had a huge following. It proved popular, but based on competition this was short-lived, Nintendo took back its supreme power over the gaming industry. Despite the struggle of power, Nintendo still released the Game Boy Color in October 13, 1998. It was just like the Game Boy, but with color. After a while, they released the Game Boy Advance and the Nintendo GameCube in 2001. But at this time, they were being charged for price fixing and were being fined 149 million euros. One of the largest antitrust fines applied in the history of the Commission. In May 2004, Nintendo released the Nintendo DS, which was a handheld console and had 2 screens. And the best part was one of them was a touchscreen. It also could create 3D graphics. 3D! 2 screens and one was touch. Imagine the excitement after the years of releasing consoles that were being left behind by competitors. They were able to come up with some magic. 2 years after the DS release, they launched the DS Lite, which was smaller and lighter, not to mention a brighter screen. Now, after the Nintendo GameCube, in November 26, 2006, they finally had another big thing coming. The Wii. This was their big break after their loss with the GameCube. The success of the Wii is attributed to the target market, since competition was focused on adult and fan-based games. The Wii targeted casual gamers, kids, and whoever didn't had the chance or the willingness to keep playing for long hours. Since competitors weren't targeting that market, it was a great niche. It wasn't until 2010 where Microsoft actually released consoles targeting this market group too. Sad to say, guys, I was part of this market group. After the Wii and the DS Lite, they released a wave of products. The Nintendo DSi, which featured everything the DS Lite had, but had an inside and outside camera, and the first time ever feature where Nintendo allowed downloadable content in its system. Following this success, they introduced something awesome in 2010, the 3DS, which had the awesome feature of backwards compatibility. So what that meant was you could play games that were made for your older DS. If that wasn't cool enough for you to spend your money on it, it could display 3D effects as well without the 3D glasses or other accessories. It also had new features called Street Pass and Spot Pass. Spot Pass delivers content from the internet to the consoles, and Street Pass uses local Wi-Fi functionality to exchange data between 3DS, 2DS and Wii U systems. Though it didn't have a good launch sales, Nintendo offered 10 free Game Boy Advance games in it to boost the sales. This strategy was such a success that Nintendo 3DS became the most successful handheld console in its first 2 years of release. The 3DS had a lot of redesigns throughout its life. They produced the 2DS, which was an entry level that didn't have 3D functionality. The 3DS XL, which was bigger and had 90% bigger screen. Okay guys, I'd like to mention the Wii U. Well, there's a lot of mixed emotions about this. It was better than the Wii, but there were issues with this gamepad. Don't get me wrong, it was way better than the Wii, but something about the short battery life of its controller just put the nail in the coffin, if you know what I mean. How frustrating would it be if you were in some boss level and boom, dead controllers. Not to mention that the gamepad was like a tablet. It just didn't fit, even the interface was buggy. So they decided to cut its life. So here's what we all have been waiting for. The Nintendo Switch. We're finally here. From cards to robots, to the console that made you look retarded. We finally hit gold. The Switch was released on March 3rd, 2017. It is a hybrid console that can be used at home through its docking system or be carried around. It's for all of you that like to either carry your game around or just have it fixed at your home as a home console. With detachable Joy-Cons, you could go 2 players without even purchasing the Pro Controller. It had motion sensors and tactile feedback. You could opt to even play on tabletop mode. They shipped over 3 million units in the first month of its release, and within a year they sold up to over 14 million units. And by 2018 it became the fastest selling console, not only in Japan but in the US as well. Let me tell you this, when you open the Switch box, it's really like Christmas all over again, I'm telling you. You get a console, 2 Joy-Cons, a dock system, a charger, and a grip thing for the Joy-Con. I'm telling you, this is huge. And to be able to play whenever you are, then When you get home, you can just put it on the docking station and continue. It's just wow. You could download games through the Nintendo eShop, or you could buy the ROM cartridges. Another thing about this is there is no region lockout anymore, so you could buy releases that only Japan had. Another cool thing is that they had bundle releases. There was Splatoon 2, Let's Go Pikachu, Let's Go Eevee, Monster Hunter XX, Animal Crossing, and so much more. America even came up with a Walmart exclusive bundle. I forgot to mention they were all skinned to make the match to the game. They even had a Mario Odyssey bundle that came with the themed carrying case. I'll just mention some of the games that have directly influenced the purchase of the Switch. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Zelda Breath of the Wild, Super Smash Bros, Pokemon Sword and Shield, and Animal Crossing. I haven't even mentioned all the games. If you aren't a fan of hybrid console, Nintendo has your back. They later released the Nintendo Lite, where it had a far longer battery life and did not have the dock system. This is a purely handheld device, but it still has the performance of the Nintendo Switch. And that is the history of Nintendo, guys. From cards to the Nintendo Switch, Nintendo has greatly influenced today's market with their consoles and games. For many years they brought out the gamers in us and brought communities together. That's all for this video, guys. If there's anything that you want for me to work on a content, feel free to leave a comment down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done it already. Lonely Mimikyu, out.